recognize that the university does its business and we all work and live on the unceded, sacred, and traditional lands of the Dena'ina people. Really want to honor that we are having this conversation in the context of thousands of years of stewardship that precede everything we're talking about now. So the Books of the Year project picks a theme. For a couple of years, we picked books to use as part of that theme to launch conversations about difficult topics. And the theme that we have for another year and a half is building resilient communities, which has allowed us to bring up a lot of wonderful speakers. And one of those books, I have a copy here somewhere, is the book Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. Our guest speaker tonight, Paul Hawken, is the editor of that book, and he will be speaking a lot about those kinds of ideas tonight. I hope you can join us. It's 7 p.m. tonight. It's free. It's in the Wendy Williamson Auditorium right here on this campus. Might have to pay for parking, but the rest of it is free. And because of that book, which is a brilliant compilation of 100 evidence-based, scalable projects and practices that would not only mitigate climate change, but actually draw carbon and methane and other greenhouse gases out of the air and help reverse it. We really wanted to use Paul's visit to showcase some of the work that's being done around our state, both so you could have it as you travel around the globe to other places, possibly give feedback to people to support what they're trying to do, and so we all could become better aware of the efforts that are going on around our state. And so that's what we're doing today. We've asked several folks from several key organizations, not an exhaustive list, to come and give us brief presentations on what they're doing. And after each person has spoken, we'll have a little bit of time for question and answers, comments, feedback, anything anybody wants to offer. Then we'll go to the next person. And then when we're done with all of that, we will invite anybody in the room. I know there are people in the room who are not making formal presentations who are doing amazing things. I'm just that one earlier today. So I'll invite you to share whatever you want to share about what you're doing. And that is the plan. And I think we're going to kick it right off with Chris Rose from the Renewable Energy Alaska Project, because he has to dash off right after his presentation. Yeah, that's the plan. So we're going to start with Chris. He's the executive director, founder, I believe, of this wonderful nonprofit that's been in business at least 15 years, promoting renewable energy across the state and energy efficiency and so on. So without further ado.
Great. Thank you, Libby. Is there a way to advance the slides?
There is, right?
Clicker. Thank you. And I apologize in advance because I'm speaking at the forum at 3:30. They've already given me a little compensation, so I'm going to be a few minutes late, but I'm going to run through this very quickly. You know, Renewable Energy Alaska Project has been around since 2014, and we're promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency. And really, we see this work in 4 buckets. So technology is one thing. When people think about renewable energy, they think about technology. We're not engineers over at REAP, we're translators. So we talk to policymakers and others, explain what's going on with renewable energy technology, because as you all know, it's moving really fast. Another area is human capacity building. We got to have people who are operating and maintaining and optimizing these systems, and a huge chunk of the work REAP does is K-12 education and training and so on. And policy reform is another big bucket. But the 4th bucket is money. It's financing, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, because you could have the best technology in the world, you could even have great people to run it, you know, policies to support it, but if you can't pay for it, you can't get the project off the ground. So we've been working on this idea of a green bank for a while. First of all, just talking about energy efficiency. We're estimating that Alaskans are collectively wasting $1 billion worth of energy every year. That's in transportation, heating, and electricity. $1 billion a year. We're actually purchasing that electricity and heating fuel and transportation fuel, combusting it, but not getting the value out of it. That's a huge $1 billion bonfire. It's like all 730,000 of us throwing over $1,000 a year into the fire. We should be keeping that money in our economy. With the Renewable Energy Fund that we got established in 2008, we're displacing 30 million gallons of diesel a year. These projects are really important. It's important to operate and maintain them over time, but how are we going to keep financing them? This was a great program when the state had a lot of money and we got a lot of grants. We got almost $300 million out of the legislature for these projects, but how are we going to keep doing it? How are we going to de-risk these projects? So, and why aren't we able to just get financing for this? Well, the real reason is that there's a short track record for clean energy. One of the analogies that I give is that the day that cars were invented, you couldn't go out and get a car loan. The banks had to figure out how to risk profile of those cars and how to figure out how to do the loans. So there's a short track record, and if you go to a bank now for a clean energy loan, whether it's efficiency on your house or a community wind farm, they're going to give you a loan, but it's going to be such a high interest rate in such a short period of time to pay it back. It's a no-brainer. You're not going to be able to do it. They also believe that clean energy projects are small and distributed, and to a large extent that's true. So one of the ways we have to figure out how to aggregate those projects. And there's really no secondary market. You think nothing of the fact that your home or auto loan is sold to somebody else. As soon as you get an auto loan, you may get a letter a month later saying now somebody else has got the loan. There's no secondary market for clean energy loans yet. It's building. And of course, there's human and organization behavior. People are slow to change. So what are the elements of green banks? Really, they typically focus on commercial technology, so we're not trying to fund or finance experiments or emerging technologies. There's got to be some kind of dedicated source of capital. The whole idea is really leveraging money. You want to bring the private sector into this and leverage them. And there's got to be some relationship with government in a typical or classic green bank. So we've been working really closely with the Connecticut Green Bank for the last 3 years. They're the first and probably the most successful green bank in the country. They started out in 2011 with one deal. One deal. Last year they did $700 million of clean energy financing just in Connecticut. And their leverage ratio is 8 to 1, meaning for every dollar that the Connecticut Green Bank's putting into a deal, the private banks are putting in $8. So about $700 million of activity in Connecticut last year, a small chunk, under $100 million was state money. This is really what a green bank does. And over time thinking about this and working with people at the Coalition for Green Capital and Connecticut Green Bank, I really realized the main function of a green bank is they're designing loan products in a way that de-risks them. Because if you can figure out a way to structure a loan and talk to a banker about it and have that banker-to-banker relationship, get them to understand that these loan programs and products that you are offering are going to actually help them make money, then they'll get interested. Part of that is aggregating a bunch of different of those distributed loans into one program. Educating those private banks about those opportunities is a big deal. And then marketing. Marketing, marketing, marketing. There's so many great loan programs out there right now at the state and federal levels that I bet most of us don't know about. So you've got to have a bank that's really dedicated to the idea of marketing and leveraging that private investment. This is a very quick model, but if a government has some dedicated capital that they can use to provide credit enhancements like a loan loss reserve fund or other ways that they can help de-risk the loan, that they can draw that private sector in to do low carbon financing projects. That's it. I'm going to be real quick, because I was told to do under 5 minutes.
And Greg has agreed to stay here for question and answer, and I know you need to leave. So.
Yeah, so Greg Stiegel is our operations director. He can answer some questions, but I think I can answer one or two before I go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the current financial situation of our state, is it possible that individual investors can make up that first?
Yeah, there's 3 layers of capital we need. And I'm remiss to not point out that we have actually gotten somewhere with the municipality of Anchorage. So the municipalities now hired the Coalition of Green Capital to look at the market opportunity for a municipal green bank here in the Anchorage area. We've tried for a while at the state level. But the first level of money we need is just startup. And I think we're getting some of that from philanthropy already. The second layer is going to be $1 million essentially to hire bankers for 3 years, because this thing is not going to make money for 3 years. We've got to have some source of capital to pay for the bankers to do this work until this thing's up and running. And the third, the one you're mentioning, is that the investment capital is actually in some ways, ironically, the easiest money to get. Because there's a lot of money on the sidelines that wants to get into this. And the private sector, the banks around here are starting to understand this. And so we probably start out with energy efficiency programs, so commercial PACE programs, which we already got established here in the state, as well as some residential program, and then move to the riskier projects, which are like the village generation projects. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What
Sorry.
role would co-ops or individuals play?
That's a great question. We thought about different ways that individuals could invest, but we haven't really gotten there yet, because that's not a typical green bank model. But it's a good idea because a lot of people want to invest in this. They don't necessarily want their money in mutual funds where they don't have any idea where the money's going. So that's something that we're thinking about. The big issue that we got right now with the municipal green bank idea is being able to, for the municipal green bank, to lend money in Southeast or in Fairbanks or something like that. But New York City Green Bank's doing that already. They're lending in 6 states. And so I think that we're using bits and pieces of models from around the country to figure out how to do this.
It's a really great student project. It's a really great class assignment to do some of the research and help behind moving that forward.
So if you're interested, talk to Greg. Okay. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Chris. So if there are, more questions? Yeah, right.
The current timeline in that position.
Well, so Chris mentioned that we're working with municipalities, so I think he mentioned the initial and the first layer of money is like around $200,000. And they've kind of broken that up into 2 sections, and that $200,000 would be hiring this firm, Coalition of Green Capital, which you mentioned, which the municipality have engaged to do the first phase, which is just like some market research and basically like figuring out if it'll work in Alaska. And we think it'll work. So that's the stage that they're at. I think it's like in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. And then once they kind of do their market research, that might take a year or so. Then we'll look at hiring someone, from Coalition of Green Capital again to kind of build out the nuts and bolts of the bank. So like the, articles of incorporation, like just making a bank on paper. And that could take another year or so. And then we got to get that big lump $1 million sum or so secured to actually have a bank with people in it. So
At least 3 years.
yeah, it's a couple of years down the road.
Okay.
But we've got some really concrete steps in the works right now with the municipality.
We have a friendly municipality at least until, what, a year from April. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Chris. Wherever he has gone. Shauna Larson is going to be our next presenter. She is the Deputy Director of Native Movement, which works statewide on Indigenous rights, protecting Mother Earth, trying to ensure that everyone has healthy, sustainable communities. I know you've been working for easily 15 years, probably in environmental organizations around the state working with Indigenous rights, and also you're on the traditional council, right, of the Chickalum Village, Native Village, and is doing major leading out there in the schools and in pretty much every other way that I know about. So we are thrilled to have you join us, Shauna Larson.
I'm I'm Shauna Larson. I'm Sukhbia on my mom's side from the village of Palawick, also known as Port Graham. And I'm Atna on my dad's side from the village of Naidiniana, also known as Chickalum Village. I am, as Libby said, I serve on the Traditional Tribal Council, and I'm the Deputy Director at Native Movement. Our organization got started in 2003. It was started by Ine Begay and Yvonne Peter, and it was really started with the intention to focus on hunting and fishing rights for Indigenous people around the state. And in 2007, it was incorporated into a 501c3 nonprofit. We work on several different issues around the state. We offer trainings on decolonization, as well as do a lot of just transition work. So we know obviously change is coming. We know that the types of energy that we're using now are not going to last forever. So we know change is definitely coming. But the change doesn't have to be justice in that change. And so we're working on a just transition to ensure that every community has the ability to say what's going to work in their own community. Some of the other trainings that we offer are dismantling oppressive power and privilege, Indigenous feminism and gender dialogues, and building people power for campaigns for justice. We really believe that our power is rooted in people power, and it says on our website, We're dedicated to building people power rooted in an indigenized worldview towards healthy, sustainable, and just communities for all. We also are fiscal sponsors to up-and-coming indigenous organizations that are trying to incorporate and are doing work, so we are able to help those smaller organizations until they're able to get their own 501c3. And then, in addition, we're an all-woman-led indigenous organization. I feel like it's not as easy to explain what we do, like, that's why I don't have a PowerPoint. So the only really way that I know to explain it is by sharing a story. And I'll try to keep it short. When I was very small, I used to spend a lot of time with my gran, and I'm an only child, and she used to take me to visit her sisters, and they would speak in our traditional language in Atna, and I would, as an only child, you know, they'd sit me down and give me some crackers or some snacks, and I was just to, you know, be quiet and listen. And I knew that if I made too big of a deal, you know, that I was going to have to put on a snowsuit and get booted outside to play, so I would try to be quiet. But occasionally I'd feel bad because they'd be talking in our language and they'd be laughing and laughing. And I want to know what are they talking about because I don't speak my traditional language. And so I remember one time in particular I asked my gram, I said, "What are you guys laughing about, gram?" And she looked at her sister kind of in a real serious way, and then she looked at me and she said, "There's no way to translate what we're talking about." And I remember thinking, how can that be true? In my very colonial 6-year-old mind, I thought, the English language is so expansive. How is it possible, you know, you can't come up with any words to explain what you're talking about? I didn't say that out loud, I just thought it in my mind. I just chalked it up to them not really wanting to tell me, but it was many years later, I was at the tribal council, and one of our elders came in, and he was really upset because for some reason, he had to look up the word subsistence in the dictionary. And if you look that word up, obviously the root, the sub, is below, and then the rest of the word, subsistence, it means just to barely survive, just to barely make it. And that's not how we would describe our culture, our way of living. And so he was really upset. He said, "This word is in all the state and federal documents. This is how we're talked about, and I don't like it. I want us to find another word, and I don't want to ever use this word again." And so he asked me, would I be willing to take a look and see what I could find. And I thought, oh, it won't be any problem. I thought there must be some other tribes that have already done this. So I looked it up. I Googled it. I spent time on the internet. I wasn't able to find any other information. And then I thought, well, it'll be okay. I'll just ask the elders because they'll know for sure. So I asked 2 separate elders on separate occasions, how do we say subsistence in our language? And what they said to me, without knowing the other one had said the same thing, was very transactional. So it was just like when the berries are ripe, it's time to pick berries. When the moose are here, it's time to go hunting. When the fish are here, it's time to fish. And that, I was thinking, it's not really what I mean, but I didn't want to pester them. So it was about 3 months later, and I was with my very, very good dear friend who's since passed on, Bobby Andrews, was from Dillingham. And we were at, of all places in the world, a federal subsistence board meeting here in Anchorage. And I thought, wow, maybe they'll have a different way of saying this in Yupik. And so I asked him, I said, hey, Bobby, how do you guys say subsistence in Yupik? And he said exactly the same thing my elders said. When the berries are ripe and it's time. He said it in Yupik and then he translated it for me in English. And I thought, oh, I said, oh, Bobby, that's not what I mean. And he's my friend. Shauna. The only thing I could think, I said, held my hand out, I said, if this is the air, the land, the water, and the animals, and this is the people, I said, how do I say this word? And he said, oh, I understand what you're talking about, I understand. He said, there is no one word in our language to say what you're describing and what you're talking about. He said, what you're trying to say has to be told in a story, because stories make you feel. And feeling is the only way that you can truly understand what your responsibility and relationship is to the things that you're talking about. And so I'll end with that and just say that that's the best way to explain the work that we're trying to do. We really want to help people understand how to not only move forward with all the great work that's going on around the state, but do it through an indigenized worldview. Thanks.
Thank you. Didn't hang around for any questions.
Oh, I thought we were doing it at the end. If anyone has questions.
Is there a reason that you're all women? Was that by design, or was that just happenstance?
It is by design. It's a lot about bringing back the matriarchy. My tribe is matriarchal, and also our executive director's tribe is actually all of the women on our tribe come from a matriarchal society. So all the women on our board, and so.
Thanks. That makes sense.
I didn't get to go, Sean, so I'm wondering if you were at the Just Transition Conference and can share just a couple highlights for people who did not get to go.
Sure. We just hosted a Just Transition conference up in Fairbanks. We had a little over 200 people. It was, so we really tried to bring people from different backgrounds to start being able to have the conversations about what does just transition look like in Alaska. So that's got to include people from faith backgrounds, that's got to include the labor union folks and the union people, academia, science, as well as tribes and moms and kids and all of those folks. We brought them all together and started talking about what does it look like. We kicked off the conference by having Winona LaDuke speak, and she was really able to lay the framework for what kinds of changes we're talking about. I think when you say just transition, it's such a buzzy word. It doesn't really mean anything. And so I just try to explain it like things that you can do that will, so for example, traditionally we did not have a cash economy in Alaska. We had a fish economy or a trading economy. In the lower 48, there have been tribes, the Navajo tribe in particular, that they were realizing that they were selling their wool for their sheep, for the rugs, and it was going through two different sets of middle people before it ended up with the folks at the end. And they were just getting pennies on the dollar. And they figured out through a just transition program on their reservation that they could cut out the middle men and women and sell directly and make a lot more money. And so it's just thinking of ways of being, I think, more efficient and more collaborative and less digging, dumping, and burning.
Thank you. This is such important work, right? Visioning where we're going in the future, but we want to invite Paul.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that I work with a group of people from all over the world, the elders, and we're called Wisdom Weavers of the World, and they say that women will take the lead in this time. And the men's job is to protect the sacred space of women so that they can do their work. And also, just with regard to assistance, we held a gathering, statewide gathering of elders and asked them if they could define subsistence, and none of them could. There is not a single word that encapsulates what subsistence means.
Thank you. This is, you introduce yourself, Larry McCoy.
Larry McCoy.
And Shauna mentioned Winona LaDuke. Some of you were here. She graced us with her presence a year and a half ago, and one of her books is a Books of the Year also. So if you're a student, particularly, you can, anybody can, check out the books in the library. We have recordings of her talk that she gave when she was here. So next up is Robin Bronin from the Alaska Institute.
I'm Jenny Marie, too.
Oh, hi, Jenny Marie.
Hi.
We'll get you next. Robin is the co-founder, right, and executive director of Alaska Institute for Justice. It's a human rights organization looking out for the human rights of everybody in Alaska, with a particular focus, I would say, on immigrants, refugees, and Alaska Native communities under threat from climate impacts. They do language accessibility work, they do legal work, they're the only legal clinic in the state doing this kind of work, and much more.
Thank
Thank you.
And the clicker is here. So I always start with this photo because these are our neighbors in Alaska, and these are the people that I am responsible to. And I'm going to try not to cry because every time I see this picture, I just think of the awful decision-making process that they're currently in because they're not able to stay in the places that they call home because of our climate crisis. And so I'm talking about adaptation and the fact that what they're experiencing is not unique to them, but it's happening all over the world because of ongoing sea level rise. And so we're trying to create a human rights framework to make sure that despite the fact that they can't stay where they are, that they will be able to protect the things that are important to them. So I'm sure you all know, I mean, those of you from Alaska, that we are in a climate crisis. But the reason why I'm showing this slide is because when we're talking about the community relocation, it's important to understand that it's the combination of slow, ongoing environmental change, like sea level rise and erosion, combined with the ongoing extreme weather events, like the storms that we get during the fall and winter season. And you all know that Arctic sea ice is leaving our planet. And this last year, 2019, we have had record low extents of Arctic sea ice, pretty much from March onward. And Arctic sea ice is critically important to coastal communities because it is the natural barrier that protects them from the storms that happen. And so with the work that we've been doing with the tribes, we collectively identified a new hazard in our state, which is called ushtek. It's a Yupik word which means literally cave in, but it is now in our Alaska State Hazard Mitigation Plan, and it is defined as catastrophic land collapse. And the reason why this is so critically important is because some of the tribes have tried to get disaster funding from our federal government based on the erosion that's happening, and they're unable to because the legislation doesn't include it. So what we are in the process of doing is getting ushtek included in federal legislation so communities can get access to the resources they need. And you all know that our temperatures have been off the charts last summer with 90-degree weather here. So these are the 15 communities that we work with. They were all identified in 2009 as being, by the federal government, as being imminently threatened by flooding and erosion. And two of the communities, Kivalina and Shishmara, have been trying to relocate for decades. Newtok, which is a community that I worked with when I was getting my PhD, finally, in October of last year, a third of the community actually relocated to their relocation site, which is awesome. The thing that is absolutely terrifying is that 2/3 of the community is still in the place where they originally lived, and they have no protection from the storm. So they experienced extreme flooding in December, and funding is the problem. So there is not enough funding. There are 21 homes at the relocation site. They need 100. And they're hoping they're going to be able to build 12 more next summer. That is not enough. So the urgency in figuring this out is absolutely critical. So it's always important for me to describe what I mean by community relocation. And so the first thing, which is the most important, is that this is about protecting the right to self-determination so that it is voluntary. And everything that we are doing is Indigenous-led, and making sure that that right to self-determination is protected in every way. This needs to be, in the lingo of hazards and disasters, disaster risk reduction. And the reason why I mention that is because it is critically important that when we're talking about community relocation, that people are in their homes, trying to figure out where to go, so that it is an orderly process and people aren't in crisis. Because if relocation occurs after, let's say, a hurricane happens, people are going to be in crisis, and they're going to need food and shelter and health care. And so that is not going to foster human rights protections, and particularly the right to self-determination. So we are determined to create this process while people are still living in their homes. It's a long-term crisis. This is not like a 2-year event. This is minimum of 5 years to make sure that people on the ground, the tribes, are making the decision, all decisions related to their relocation, protecting human rights. And often in the circles that I work in, not the tribes, but federal and state government agencies, they just focus on infrastructure. This is about people. And that's why their human rights need to be protected, and the connection with land and each other is the primary focus of our work. So I also have a law degree, so we're focused on these governance issues. So the major problem is that there is no state or federal government agency that actually has the authority or funding to actually relocate a community. It's been recognized by the federal government. President Obama, when he was in office, we actually got it into his climate change task force report. And we were hoping, we were working with the White House Council on Environmental Quality, that they would actually move this forward. They moved it maybe a nano-mint inch, barely moved it forward, and actually creating the type of framework that we need. And the reason why this is so important is because we've got to figure out the when piece. Like, when is relocation the best long-term adaptation strategy? And we are figuring that out. The tribes are figuring that out. And then, there's nothing that says who decides and how that decision made. So we have an awful legacy in this country of government-mandated relocations, which happened most recently here in Alaska during World War II, when the Anungan people were forcibly relocated by the federal government from the Aleutian Islands to southeast Alaska, and 10% of the population died. So it is urgent and essential that we figure out this relocation framework, and that we're protecting the individual and collective rights of the folks that are faced with this issue. So at the international level, there are a number of international human rights documents that outline the right to life, right to self-determination, right to practice and revitalize cultural traditions, and right to improve livelihoods. The challenge is that there's actually no human rights document that actually talks about climate force displacement and puts all of these human rights protections into one document so that it can guide other governments, including the United States government, about what needs to happen in regard to this issue. So in talking about the right to self-determination, we have the heart of our work has actually been about community-based social and environmental monitoring. So we work with an Alaska Native elder, and we worked with her to ask the communities that we work with, what are the environmental changes that you're concerned about? And the tribes told us they were concerned about erosion, thawing permafrost, and then the storms and storm surges that were happening. So we brought federal and state government entities to the tribes that we work with, and installed community-based erosion monitoring, thawing permafrost, and monitoring. And then the tribes during the storm season, which is now way longer than it used to be, they send me pictures of what's happening in their communities, and I send it on to the National Weather Service and all these other federal and state government agencies, because there's been this giant disconnect between what's happening in rural Alaska and the federal and state government agencies that are primarily in Anchorage. And then this is a schematic about how we envision the governance framework for relocation to happen, where you always start with protection in place. And then we are working with the tribes to figure out what the social and environmental indicators are. And one of them may be the fact that a lot of the sewage lagoons are being impacted by USHDEC, and there may not be another place within the community to place a sewage lagoon. And if that is true, it may be a really important indicator for the community to understand that they may want to start a relocation process. And then we do our work internationally. So in October of 2018, one of our partners brought up 8 community-based organizations and clans from the South Pacific so that the tribes and clans could raise their collective voice and demand that their human rights be protected. And we are now in the process of bringing 20 Alaska Native folks to Fiji in October to continue the conversation and the coalition building. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had forgotten to say that Chris Rose was not the model for how fast people need to talk in these things. He just had to leave. So I didn't need to force people into spinning their way through these amazing pieces of work that they're doing. And in recognition of Shauna's point around stories and feelings, that feelings are welcome, right? This is a really, really hard time, hard topic. Grief is present with most of us as we do this work. So this is an amazing piece of work. People have questions or comments? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. 2 questions. It sounds like the community-based erosion monitoring that you're working on is really similar to something that Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium is also working on. And do you coordinate with them on that? So that's the first question. The second question had to do with the absence of a federal or state entity with a mandate. But I thought that's what Denali Commission was working on and has worked with Village of Newtok on their movement. So I'm a little confused by that statement. I wonder if you could clarify.
Great questions. So we do work with ANTHC, but not in that capacity. So ANTHC has the LEO network where it's local environmental observations. This is way more, how would I say it? So the purpose of this is to give communities the knowledge that they need so the state government entity that we work with is the Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys. Because the DGGS takes those community-based observations and then scales it up so that the tribes get predictive rates of change, which is what they need to make decisions at the local level. We just started the permafrost line, so that's the whole purpose. This isn't about modeling. I don't think modeling is helpful when we're talking about local decision-making. And also, again, to go back to the right to self-determination, it is critical that the tribes are gathering this information and the information comes back to them in a way that's meaningful. In regard to the Denali Commission, so President Obama designated the Denali Commission to be the lead federal agency on climate resilience. The big bummer was that President Obama didn't give them any funding, 1, to do it. 2, and almost more importantly, the Denali Commission had absolutely no authority to tell like the U.S. Department of Transportation or the U.S. Housing and Urban Development, I need this amount of money, give it to me so that we can move the relocation effort forward. And so they worked really, really, really hard to make that collaboration happen, and it didn't get, it got 140 people from Newtok relocated. They have changed their work plan, the Denali Commission, so they're no longer doing this work. And I'm sure you spread the news that the current president wants to terminate the Denali Commission. So it's not a sustainable, we need a systemic change. And the last thing that I would say is it's critically important, like we have part of the framework, it currently exists. It needs to be indigenized. It needs to include relocation. But we're starting with what currently exists, and we're working, so we've submitted comments to Congress proposing with tribal resolutions what the tribes want from what currently exists, and then proposing what needs to exist in order to meet the needs of these communities.
was just curious, as a tribal council member, what work you're doing around sovereignty. I know self-determination is important, but also having tribes exercise their sovereignty. And then I wondered, because my mother-in-law was one of the authors of UNDRIP, Andrea Carmen, International Indian Treaty Council, as FPIC would be part of, I just texted her, I was like, hey, where does forced relocation due to climate change fall under, is it included? But free prior informed consent, like, I was just curious, like, what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, so the sovereignty piece, we get tribal resolutions for everything that we do. And that's how we don't go to communities unless we're invited, and everything has to have a tribal resolution. I am not a fan of free, prior, and informed consent, honestly, because I think it is way too vague. It has not protected people. And so I know that that's part of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but I don't use that ever. It's the right to self-determination, because that, in my mind, more clearly demonstrates that tribes need to be making these decisions. And then finally, because the world, the bummer is the World Bank is now gotten involved in this issue, and that's what they use, free, prior, and informed consent, and uniformly it has been disastrous for every community that they have provided funding to the government to relocate that community.
My mother-in-law often says that UNDRIP is the floor, not the ceiling.
Yes, and your mother does great work, so I yes.
Mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law.
Big difference.
Quickly? Oh, yeah. I'm wondering, we hear more and more about the housing crisis in some of the coastal communities, and I'm wondering if you're seeing a connection there between erosion, increase in, or lack of housing, and climate refugee sort of dynamics, like are people having to leave their communities because of coastal erosion and housing issues?
Yeah, so I honestly don't know how to answer that, because, so as Libby mentioned, most of my work has been with the immigrant and refugee community, and I'm like, this is about a decade of my work, and coming into it, I've been horrified by the way colonialism has impacted rural Alaska, and that is most apparent in housing. I mean, there are, I think, lots of ways, like the lack of plumbing and water, but the housing crisis is giant. And look, what we do is we look at the reports that have already been written for a lot of these communities, and it's outrageous to me. It's a gross injustice that we well know, meaning the people writing the reports, state and federal government agencies. One of the communities that we work with, 50 houses were condemned in 2012 because they were unsafe for people to live in, and that was in 2012, and only 5 of those houses were replaced, and people are still living in those other 45 houses.
So,
and that has nothing to do with the climate crisis.
Climate change?
Excuse me? No, that has nothing to do with the climate crisis. It has to do with the state of infrastructure in rural Alaska.
I'm thinking there might be some connection in some instances, though, where infrastructure is collapsing because of sometimes clouds that they apply. Serious stuff, and that's making the housing issue worse.
Well, it is. It's absolutely exacerbating it. But there was a problem before the crisis in thawing permafrost. Yes. Thank you.
Jenny,
Close, we'll have a little bit of time for you to get to ask your question. I hope
and I think
and come on up. Thank you so much. Our next presenter is Jenny Marie Stryker. She's from the Alaska Center. We just met each other today.
Just now.
So I can't say, you'll have to introduce your title and so forth, but she's representing the Alaska Center, which has been in Alaska for as long as I can remember, under various different names. The Alaska Center for the Environment. Their purpose really is to engage Alaskans, to elect folks, and to move things forward in terms of healthy community and environment.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So my name's Jenny Marie. You'll have to forgive me. I'm a poor substitute for our executive director, Polly Carr, who couldn't be here today. So I'm here in her place. trying to inform all of us. So I put both of our logos up here. We're the Alaska Center, but also the Alaska Center Education Fund. So I work for sister organizations, and we have a vision of a thriving, just, and sustainable future for future generations. We have a C4 organization, that's the Alaska Center, which cultivates community advocates, elects leaders who will stand up for clean air and water in our communities. And we also have this education fund, which is a C3, which cultivates future leaders who share these values and care about our home. So basically, in summary, we're working to build a movement of engaged Alaskans to combat the climate crisis, protect our wild salmon legacy, and ensure our grandchildren's children can call this place home. So with that, there are a bunch of different programs that I could talk about today. I will try to keep us focused into the drawdown. My role is as the political director, so I'd be remiss if I said that a large part of the way we battle the climate crisis is by electing leaders who care about it and are going to do something. That's a huge, huge, huge part of what we do and a huge part of what I do. But that's not what I'm going to focus on today because I don't want to get too political, and instead I will talk about our Solarize program. So this program is a campaign that has been utilized across the nation and that you might already be familiar with, and it's a tool to bring down the cost of installing solar panels for homes and making it more accessible for communities. So Solarize, wrong way. So Solarize Anchorage, and now we have Solarize Fairbanks, and we will have Solarize Kenai soon. It's a campaign to eliminate the market barriers to solar, and those barriers are cost, complexity, and customer inertia. So the way that we do this, we have a program that allows group purchasing, which allows a volume discount. So that's eliminating high upfront cost to solar. And dealing with complexity and customer inertia. I know my brain shuts up when I hear too many details and numbers and scary things that I don't understand. So we try to make it simple for people by allowing neighborhoods to band together to do things like installer selection, by offering customer outreach with a limited time offer, which offers savings and special deals. Again, the wrong way. So our campaign in Anchorage, the reason we started this was in 2018, some neighbors in the neighborhood of Airport Heights here got together and were talking around the idea of starting a program like this and making it happen. We got together with them, with our Anchorage organizer, Kristen Collins, as well as the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, and basically made this idea a reality. We use community council boundaries, which is essentially a fancy word for neighborhoods, as the boundaries for this program. This is successful because it gives the community a sense of ownership of their program and gives the installer a platform to the who, what, where, and why to offer discounted prices too. So in our solar program has worked in Airport Heights, South Addition, Rogers Park, Jernigan, Spenard, and will be working in Fairbanks in 2020. And the essential value of what solar does, a slide like this scares me because it's a lot of details, but what our Solarize program does is bring neighbors together. They band together to go through all parts of the process. So they pick pick an installer, they review applications together, they review those benefits of the applications. It's non-binding, it's really just neighbors to neighbors organizing together. We're just there to provide space and a little bit of background and connect the dots for people. And what it has been able to do, this is an example taken from an Airport Heights home, is offer folks a saving in their first year if they install solar of like $700. It can save you $17,000 over 25 years. And the carbon offset effect can be the impact of taking your car off the road for 12 years. So that's the summary of our Solarize program. But I think to go back to the first slide and really round kind of our work, I would be remiss if I also didn't mention I'm just so honored to be here today with so many fantastic organizations. We work really hard to partner with all these organizations. Our logo was up here when Shauna was talking. Shauna represents Native Movement. Please look up them, don't look up us, if you're interested in anything Shauna talked about. And yeah, I think that our programs are engaging and electing, and programs that are really isolated, like this Solarize one. And I think through that combination of many different things into one, we try to have an impact on climate change. So that's that.
Here we go. Okay, somebody else. Maybe have some questions you'd like to ask.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about community solar. Are there any plans to be involved in that? Because like at our house, installing solar doesn't make sense, and some people don't own their own house.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet with the Solarize program, but I think it's something that we're definitely thinking about, especially in Fairbanks. That has come up a lot, because Fairbanks has a lot more tricky neighborhoods with cloud cover and trees and all the rest. So we haven't done that yet through the Solarize program, but it's something that we're exploring. Yeah. Yeah, any other questions?
I'll just say what I know, which you didn't mention, which they have an amazing program training younger leaders in this area. The Alaska Youth for Environmental Action is an amazing statewide program training young leaders. We have Trail Site Discovery Camp for littler people, just to make sure they're connected to our Earth systems. And you also are about to host, I know because I declined to facilitate, a gathering of municipal leaders statewide who are working on climate change. That's coming up pretty soon, so there's a really amazing bunch of programs that you all are doing. And I happen to live very close to here, and we are doing the Solarize project. I sort of seduced my neighbors into taking leadership, and they were trying to get me to take more back. But this is happening, and here at UAA, we have begun a solar rising project of our own. Our facilities group is working pretty hard to get some major solar installations here. Excuse me, and they are talking about trying to figure out ways to actually let neighborhoods benefit from their volume efforts when that time comes.
Yeah, we could get really wonky if we want to too, into like net metering stuff and all the kind of policy stuff we try to do to make these solar programs effective. But thank you for mentioning all of our other fantastic work that I didn't mention. I appreciate it.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much. Wonderful. Our next presenter, excuse me, is Kerry Williams from the Alaska Climate Action Network. He works, is this right, for the Alaska Climate Energy Institute? Did I say? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I looked up, and let me see if I can find it, the description of the Climate Action Network, of which I've been a part for a long time. And it was a very cool write-up, so I'm actually going to read you what they say on their site, which is that the Alaska Climate Action Network is an emerging grassroots network of community-based groups, indigenous leaders, scientists, renewable energy experts, artists, yay, and concerned Alaskans who agree it's time for serious action. So that would probably include everyone in the room. And before you start, because I don't think you're going to talk about it, Carrie with Seal Smith, here who's also a leader in that group, and Brett Higman, have put together a pumped energy storage for Alaska report at the request, I believe, of the governor. Is that right? And have just given it to him. So maybe afterwards you would answer a few questions.
Hello everyone, my name's Kerry, and I'm here today representing the Alaska Climate Action Network, also known as ACTAN, and thank you Libby for inviting us. My talk is about pumped hydro energy storage, and what is pumped hydro? It's a giant battery, that's all. It charges up by pumping water uphill to a storage tank, a storage reservoir, to store extra energy when you're generating too much from renewables and all that. And then it returns the energy by letting it go down through the turbine and going into another reservoir. Now, it's hydro, so will it affect salmon downstream? There's no downstream, so no. It's Alaska has massive, whoops, what happened? Alaska has massive wind energy. All the red on there is very strong wind. And we need massive storage to go with it. We need seasonal storage. We need long-term storage. We have, and, whoops. What happened? Okay. We have 122 islanded microgrids, plus the rail belt grid. And all of them are too small to balance wind energy by themselves. That means we need a week or more of storage to cover wind droughts and a lack of solar energy during the short wind days. Our mountainous state has potential long-term hydro sites near most microgrids across the state, which are, some of them are there. We've identified 30 or 40 different microgrids that do have potential pumped hydro storage next to it and affordable. Pumped hydro is scalable. It can be founders, it can be worthwhile for communities as small as 300 houses. So it's good for Bush, it's good for Anchorage, and rail belt and everything. A couple of years ago, I stumbled on the concept of using a Kootenai Lake as a pumped hydro site for the railroad grid, which could also help return a historical salmon run to Kootenai Lake, which is unusual for a hydro project. It's fixing the problem that original hydro screwed up. There were dams down along the Kootenai River that would knock that salmon back up to a Kootenai Lake that was put in, I think, 1929 or something. The lower one was just recently taken out, and there's one more at the end of the Kootenai Lake. Once that's taken out, that'll help. Right now, the Kootenai Lake is too low to let water into the Kootenai River. And the pumped hydro, we can keep the Kootenai Lake high enough so that water can escape into the river without really losing any energy or anything like that. Now, this pumped hydro is a lot different from other pumped hydros in that most pumped hydros, or as far as I know, all pumped hydro right now is short-term. It's 4 to 8 hours long, and it's about as expensive as normal batteries and everything. We need, because we're in Alaska, we need seasonal storage. We need it to last a week or longer. And this is completely different in that regard, and yet this one, the Kootenai in particular, it has enough for a month of storage. It's gigantic. The idea is now being vetted independently by several people, and if no insurmountable issues are found with it, we can go to 100% renewable energy in a very short time. So, anyway, thank you. Any questions?
How do you deal with the freezing during winter?
The inlet and outlet would be way below the ice level for the surface ice, so just like normal hydro, it'll continue to be.
When you freezing, the pipes transporting to the reservoirs?
No, as long as everything's built right, it won't.
More student project, this one, right, seriously?
So, Kootenai Lake is also a huge part of our water source for Anchorage. So would this pump have any effect on that?
No, it shouldn't at all. the Upper Thunderbird Reservoir and the Salmon Reservoir are balanced in that they use the same amount of water. And it would those reservoirs would only have equipment water in them. So in other words, equipment water would be pumped back and forth through the equipment reservoir, and so no effect on the water quality or any different quality of that. The lower Thunderbird Reservoir and the River Reservoir would actually go through a pipe near the end of the lake, and would not interact with the equipment reservoir at all.
If I can add just a little bit, because the reservoirs will be storing water, as the glacier recedes, it actually could help with managing and keeping the supply up for the city over the long run because of the receding glaciers.
One more? Yeah. In the back.
I'm curious if you've reached out to the native village of Aklubna or Aklubna Inc. and what their thoughts might be on this?
We've had a little bit of conversation with a few of the members, and they're evaluating it now too.
Cool.
So we're hoping that everything will be good with everything.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Next, we have folks from right here at UAA, Micah Hahn and Chelsea Ford-Waller are going to speak about the climate action plan that was passed last May. Micah is assistant professor of environmental health with the UAA Institute for Civil Health Studies. And Chelsea is a graduate student working with a focus on transportation and a general advocate for public transit and transportation for the city.
Great, thank you very much, Libby. So we're here to talk about both the development of the climate action plan as well as implementation. And this has been a joint project from the beginning up through now, and so this is parallel. We're tag teaming the presentation. Chelsea is also an employee of the municipality now, so she represents sort of both hats, but together we represent the university and the community. So we'd like to start our presentation by sort of grounding us in what's happening here in Anchorage. We seem to have very short memories, so sometimes by the winter time we've forgotten the smoke and unpredictable salmon runs of the summer, and by the summer we forget our icy roads, and so we kind of like to put it all up at once so we can remember this is the picture of where we're living and why we're really interested in making sure that we're prepared for these types of impacts. So despite all of the really significant environmental changes that have been happening, when we started this work a couple of years ago, the municipality did not have a single dedicated sustainability employee or a focused plan for adapting to climate change or mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, other than sort of the standard hazard response plans. So basically, over the course of a year, we went from finding initial funding, reviewing what these plans look like in other communities, to developing a full-fledged climate action plan. And this, as Libby mentioned, was adopted by the Anchorage Assembly in May of last year. And so one of the really, this marks the first time that the largest city in Alaska, with almost half of the state's population, had a strategic roadmap for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and preparing for the impacts of climate change. And climate action plans are not new. We're kind of behind the curve in this regard, but one of the things that we think is really innovative and it was exciting about both the development of the plan but now into implementation is that it was really a three-way partnership or conversation between the municipality, the university, and the broader Anchorage community. So, for example, when we were developing the plan, we had 7 open houses over the course of the year. We had 28 mobile climate workshops where people, organizations requested for us to come to either their community council meeting or their church meeting or their organizational membership meeting, so we could either give a presentation about an aspect of the plan or have some kind of Q&A or workshop feedback session. And so it was really exciting to have almost 1,300 people, Anchorage residents, participate in the development of the plan. And if you're sitting here thinking, oh, this is the first time I've heard about the climate action plan, don't worry, that outreach and the opportunity to engage is really just beginning, and I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea so she can tell you about the exciting things that have happened in the last several months as we've pulled out the beginning of the plan, and how you can find out more about what's going on.
So I'll just highlight on this slide, we created this amazing climate action plan from all of this wonderful feedback that we got, and it's over 100 pages long. So that document is perhaps not accessible to the average Anchorage resident. And so to accompany that, we created the climate action strategy, which is a shorter document. It shows sort of the immediate tasks that we're focusing on, that are short-term wins, that are benefiting the community, that are specific to the municipality. The climate action plan includes, actions that are mostly for the municipality, but also responsible, like the university might be responsible for some, or other partner organizations in the community might be responsible for some. And the action strategy is really focused on these short-term municipal actions that we're going to take. So into implementation, we started off right away. Our sustainability group has started reinvigorated the resilience sub-cabinet that was created around our welcoming and resilient Anchorage initiatives. And we meet quarterly. Most of the department heads are on that sub-cabinet to talk about what everybody's doing, make sure we're all on the same page, make sure, for example, one initiative that I'm supporting right now with the transportation folks is making sure that the glass recycling, we're using as much glass recycling as we can in our transportation project, so that glass recycling is staying here in Anchorage. But we have to talk together to figure that stuff out, and so meeting quarterly helps us with that. And then we're also still in partnership with the university working on developing an Anchorage Climate Action Council. We have a couple of wonderful fellows at the municipality this year that are helping us to figure out some framework around that, which would be an outside body that would continue to sort of oversee this work and make sure, regardless of administration with the municipality or administration at the university, that this work continues and that we're keeping track of it. And I also believe there's a youth climate action group being sort of stood up by the assembly in the works right now as well, which is exciting. So I wasn't as good as Micah and didn't write down my notes, but there are a bunch of 2019 highlights, including solar panels on the Egan Center, one of our conference centers downtown. We also hosted or helped collaborate with Refugee Assistance and Immigration Services to do more translation of our emergency management materials, help folks understand what to do or how to prepare for an earthquake, for example, regardless of the language that you speak. And there are a bunch of other stuff. Again, our sustainability team is based out of solid waste services, so they're really taking the ball and running with it. We have an amazing community compost program. They've launched the glass recycling, as I mentioned. So really a lot of exciting short-term wins. We've been changing over, you've probably heard, we've been changing over our city lights to LEDs, which has reaped huge benefits in terms of cost savings, which can then be put back into our city budget to go towards further climate action. And of course, we want to make sure that we're keeping track of what we're doing. So we're trying to, at the same time as we're implementing this and trying to hit the ground running, we also want to make sure that we're monitoring what we're doing. Where are we today? We're not doing so great on our climate action. Where do we want to be is way, way better. And so we have to make sure that we have specific metrics that we're looking towards, that we're aiming for, and that we're keeping track of. And again, that resilience sub-cabinet, with our quarterly meetings, we're updating a spreadsheet quarterly. It sounds very technical. It's not, but it helps us to understand, which actions are we stalling out on? Which actions do we need to put more pressure on? Which actions are easy wins that we just need to, bridge a communication gap for to get done. And that's been really helpful. Again, as I mentioned, the sustainability team is doing a little bit better on their climate action because they're in solid waste services, and so they're really able to grind away more than some of us that have perhaps more layers to peel off first. And we also stood up, the fellows that I mentioned earlier have stood up a great Sustainable Anchorage website that is going to show all of this so that we're accountable to our constituents and the Anchorage community, and that we're making sure that everyone is aware of what's going on and how things are going.
Okay, thank you. Quick questions?
The transportation, I know they sampled the electric bus, I think sometime last year. Did they find out anything from that?
Yeah, it was really cool to have that in Anchorage, and They are really excited about it. There's unfortunately massive upfront costs to overhaul, the maintenance, the battery charging facility. So it's something that has great data that we can now say, when we're ready to put that investment in, this is how it worked. But we just don't have that investment available.
So we're currently engaged in some of these presentations. Okay, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yeah, just really, was the city able to complete the greenhouse gas inventory? Did that get a question?
So, yeah, I'll speak to that.
Take it to the audience as a member of our sustainability team.
Yeah, my name is Piers Schwab over at Department of Solid Waste Services with the sustainability team. The meeting completed a greenhouse gas inventory for 2015 that we're in the process of updating. We're going to be getting data for 2018 and hopefully 2008 as well to start getting some trends in our greenhouse gas production.
Okay. That's kind of like step one.
Right.
You have to know where you are.
So this plan was approved back in May and have this concept of a climate advisory committee. I'm just wondering what the current status is. I've been trying to find out what that group has been doing. Is that open to the public or are they even meeting?
Great, thank you. That's an awesome question. Okay, so this is, when she had the slide, it had this the municipal sub-cabinet, and then it also mentioned the Anchorage Climate Action Council. So that's the group that she mentioned that I think maybe you're referring to.
Yeah.
We're trying to sort of come up with what that should look like. And so, for example, the latest iteration is that we're thinking of, and I would love people's feedback, so you should talk to me after if you want to give us some ideas. But basically, this group has, the primary role is that every year when the municipality creates a progress report, it will be public, obviously, anyone will be able to look at it. But this is the group that, it would go to that group, and then they will be able to provide feedback on whatever the muni says we have or haven't done in the past year. We're also really interested in that group sort of giving the municipality feedback on how to make sure that the plan is both benefiting and not harming our entire Anchorage community. So sort of, we talk about having like an equity focus or an equity lens. So like if we are going to create a new, some kind of new policy in town, how do we make sure that it doesn't negatively impact renters, for example? And so that group sort of has lots of different things that we are hoping that they'll be doing. So that's why creating the structure is a little bit of a puzzle to fit together, I think. And so the idea, though, is that we will create this group and then put out a call for applications. So when it will be going up on the Sustainable Anchorage website, and you will be able to, individual members of the Anchorage community will be able to submit an application and say, I want to sit on this council, and then all of those applications will get reviewed and we'll create that body. So I think to keep track of it, there's a listserv that you can sign up for. We could send it on a piece of paper if anyone wants to be on the Anchorage Municipality Climate Action or Sustainability listserv. We'll put you on it today, and that will definitely send out an announcement there. We're also going to be, we have lots of organizations we've worked with over the course of the development of the plan, hundreds, and we'll be advertising through those. So through AKCAN, through Alaska Center, so if you're on any of those listservs, we'll probably also get an announcement. So I think, does that answer your question? In development, stay tuned, get on the listserv. I think are really what I want you to take home.
And connect with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, I'd love to.
We'd like to talk to you.
Of course, I would love to hear your ideas.
Thank you. Awesome. Chuck is the Alaska State Director for the Wilderness Society. Born and raised in Nome. He has a legal background, and he also is previously the administrative and legal officer for the Alaskan Native Corporation. He's holds many other jobs. And welcome.
Thank you, Libby. I'll try to be mindful of your time, make this quick, but as Libby said, my name is Carlin Itchak. I'm the Alaska State Director for the Wilderness Society. My Nupiat names are Nahayatik Juahak. My dad is originally from Barrow. And the Wilderness Society was started in 1935 by Robert Marshall and a team of other conservationists and biologists and concerned citizens like Robert Marshall and Olaus and Margaret Murie. And also many of you may have known our local past president of the Wilderness Society, Celia Hunter, who lived in Fairbanks. And we have about 1 million members and supporters at the Wilderness Society. We have about 177 employees across the country. Our headquarters are in DC. And here in Alaska, we have 6 of us in the state office. Our mission is to protect public lands and to encourage Americans to care for public spaces. And you're probably wondering, what does the Wilderness Society have to do with climate change? And officially, until a few months ago, not much. But now the governing council of the Wilderness Society has declared that climate change is our #1 priority. And we're now looking at large swaths of public land as being important in mitigating climate change, not only for their sequestration properties, but also the connected large spaces and the importance that they play in mitigating climate change. Here in Alaska, our #1 priority right now is to reversing the 2017 Tax Act that opened up the 1002 coastal plain to oil and gas drilling. And so we think that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the coastal plain is very important in mitigating climate change, in addition to all the other issues that go around the Arctic National Wildlife. It's a sacred calving ground of the porcupine caribou herd, which is essential not only to the Gwich'in people of the Gwich'in Nation, but also many indigenous Inupiaq people in the north. And also, I could spend the rest of the evening telling you why it's important. If you look at all of the birds that migrate to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, they come and go to all 50 states in the lower 48. At one point, they end up in the Arctic Refuge. The fragile ecosystem of the refuge is vital, also as a very important polar bear denning habitat. The coastal plain has numerous bowhead and other whales, beluga whales. And so right now we're helping to lead a national campaign to help the federal, or to encourage the federal government to reduce emissions on public lands by 30%. And which right now, as you know, is an uphill battle. We're in defense mode. Almost every day we wake up and there's a new issue that we're trying to push back with the current administration. But if you look at the federal lands in the U.S., if the federal lands were a nation, they would be ranked 5th as the biggest polluters for greenhouse gas emissions. And 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions now from the operations on the federal lands comes from the federal lands, like oil and gas and all of those types of things. And BLM alone, 90% of their lands have been opened up and permitted for oil and gas leasing. So we're trying to be consciously aware of the contributions to climate change through actions that are happening on federal lands, and trying to do our part to reverse that. And it is challenging, but we've made it our priority. That's what we're trying to do at the Wilderness Society. So I'm trying to think I should probably stop there. And thank you for this opportunity.
It's exciting to have that be such a focus. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Since you're a captive audience, the last few minutes I'm going to tell you what's happening at UAA, but before that happens, I know there's people in the room who are doing work that weren't invited to present. Alaska Common Ground has been hosting a series of forums on climate change, and I'm sure more will be coming. Citizens Climate Lobby, where are you? Boom, you want to say a minute or two on that one?
Okay. Yeah, Citizens Climate Lobby is pretty much a volunteer-based organization that is all over the United States, and now it's a global organization. And we have chapters in just about every congressional district in the United States, including 4, and actually maybe next week we're going to start a 5th one in Kenai, in Alaska. And we have been laser focused on putting a price on carbon, which means it's going to be expensive to pollute. And right now there's a bill in Congress, and we are advocating for that bill in Congress. It's the Energy Innovation Act. And the reason we are is because it's the strongest climate bill that's ever been introduced with a bipartisan, as a bipartisan bill. And we hold local meetings here the second Saturday of every month over in room 220 of the Rasmussen building. So if you'd like to join us, or if you want to talk to me afterwards and get signed up so that we can send you email, we're glad to have it. Thank you.
So, Juliette briefly mentioned you have a program going on with elders around the world, speaking on the climate crisis. You want a minute on that one?
Okay, good, thank you. Like I said, I work for the Wisdom Weavers of the World. They're linked to www.wisdomweavers.world. And we are going to launch a worldwide campaign that is aimed at changing human consciousness. We met in Hawaii in 2017 to answer two questions. What is the state of the world as we see it now? And what must we be doing now? And they noted that the refugees, the political corruption, the economic injustices, the murders, the suicides, the wars, all of these things have one thing in common. And that, for example, there are thousands of more environmental organizations around the world today than there were 30 years ago. But yet Mother Earth's life support systems are coming to the edge. Why? Is anyone asking why? And the why is that our consciousness is mental. We are focused on the mind. And that these elders feel like logic and rational thinking is not going to answer the issues that we face here today. That the only thing that will tell you what you need to do is your heart. And the mind's job is to implement that which the heart tells you to do. And so each one of us, they say, have a gift during this time. We've chosen to be here at this time. And that each one of us has a unique gift. And that gift can only be accessed by you through your heart. And what your heart tells you to do is going to take courage to follow what it says. Each one of us is going to be totally different than what our hearts tell us to do. But they say that the time of the lone wolf is done. And we cannot get out of this with ourselves and fighting each one of our organizations separately. And that we need to unify worldwide to focus on changing human consciousness. In the meantime, they say, yeah, there are things that are happening that shouldn't happen. For example, I don't know, most of you don't know that 300,000 caribou calves died in a pair of the porcupine caribou herd when they were trying to cross the Yukon River, and it wasn't frozen, so they drowned. You know, that's just a minor point. The elders here say the salmon are going to disappear in the next 5 to 10 years. Salmon, all salmon. What kind of economic impact is that going to have? What kind of social and cultural impact? No one is focused on these issues. And the reason for that is that we're organized in our minds to think of things separately. And we cannot, during this time, think of things separately. Everything is interdependent. And we have to realize that. And to jump to your heart is going to take courage, because people will think you're crazy. You know, it's like your heart will tell you, don't worry about money, just follow your passion, and the rest will be taken care of. And the passion for everyone here, we are the gurus. There are no more single gurus. We are all gurus. We have the answers, but we have to have the courage to jump. To jump to a place that says, I don't care about what my planning for my future, that I need to pay attention to what is happening now, because these elders are saying we have maybe 5 to 10 years left to survive as human species. And we need to stop doing business as usual, because the time for doing business as usual is gone. And these elders from all over the world, we filmed what they did. We asked them before we filmed, how much of this can we film? Can we film your ceremonies in its entirety and your discussions? And they said yes. The first time any Native group of this stature got together and said, the time for secrets is done. We have no time left. We have got to show the world who we are from the heart. And the heart teaches you love and compassion and caring. And this is the way that indigenous people have connected with each other and with Mother Earth. This is how we get our information about what to do. And we are going around the world. We've got now about 18 different languages that are going to, we're releasing a 13-minute film that's going to be introduced by Reuters worldwide in their network. And we don't have anything edited from what the elders are saying. And so I encourage you to think about this, feel it, and decide whether or not you're going to go to the heart or you're going to do business as usual, because business as usual will not work.
Before we go, you can maybe write how people can access your project on the whiteboard. You can put the link up there before you go, put the link up so people can find it.
Yeah.
So we have this room for another half an hour after our scheduled time for people to stay, mix. We haven't even gotten to hear whatever you might offer us, and I'm going to try to harvest it some way in whenever I get here. So thank you. It's hard to follow a message from global elders with anything, but I'm going to just show you a few things that are coming up. If you want to stay in touch around more things that are happening, at least through the university's resources, there's a sheet going around. You can sign it up and we can keep you in touch with some of the things that are coming our way. For starters, we have a fabulous chancellor. She is with us today. We are so fortunate at taking us through multiple challenges since your arrival here, but she has graciously established a working group on climate change, which has allowed people at the university to mobilize in ways that have not been seen before. There's a couple things going on. We're working on becoming an online virtual institute for free resources, curriculum, data sets, textbooks, research journals, and so on through UAA, so people can free or affordably access all that information about climate change worldwide. Trying to partner with some major folks out there. People are working on a climate change communications network. We're consulting with a lot of Alaska Native organizations and leaders outside of the university to come up with a network that allows us to really up our game in terms of how we communicate about climate change statewide. Talk to Tim Hinterberger about this. It's already been mentioned, we're working on the Climate Action Plan Council. We're working a lot on climate change curriculum here. There's discussion about getting an entry-level interdisciplinary course about climate change. We don't have any yet, and students are asking for just some basic courses on climate change from an interdisciplinary perspective. We're doing a lot around teaching climate change across the curriculum. Travis Rector, who has been leading a faculty learning community 2 semesters, helping faculty figure out how to teach climate change in their courses. We had a showcase a week ago or so about all the different kinds of work people are doing in their courses and research they're doing. And we have a faculty development intensive on teaching climate change across the curriculum on May 8th, so watch for that if you're faculty members. We have a emerging student club, again, Tim Hinterberger. Students, if you want to connect with somebody who is organizing that. The Green Fee Board, I know there are 2 people at least here. Students, raise your hand. The Green Fee Board, 3. Oh, awesome. Okay. So if you want to get involved that way. We have our fabulous speaker happening this very evening. Wave your hand, Paul, so everybody can see him. He's going to be talking in a few hours. So anyway, please come and join us. It will be an amazing presentation about climate solutions. His new book is called Regeneration, How to Reverse the Climate Crisis in One Generation or something like that, right? Very nice. I just mentioned this. If you're faculty and want to join us for that faculty learning community, it's still open. We have a presentation coming sponsored by the Masters of Public Administration folks in the College of Business and Public Policy about what Canada is doing in terms of climate change and how that impacts some of the rest of us. We have a community forum coming up. We're not hosting it, but it's being hosted by the Alaska Community Forest Council and others on what's happening to our trees in this town. I'm sure you're paying attention. We need to really think well about our trees. We have a wildfire prevention panel along those same lines. Given what happened last summer, we need to be ready, and Micah's on it as well as some other UAA and outside folks. And we have a climate scientist coming up from Sitka on the 26th to talk about how to move us from knowledge to action on climate. So there is a climate change calendar out there. If you want to stay in touch with that, talk to the man behind the camera back here. He'll tell you how to get to it so that you can see all these things as they come up.